I have this theory and framework about real estate that I use a lot, and I call it the resource triangle. And it's the idea that every deal and really every portfolio needs some combination of three different resources. Those resources are time, money, and skill. And some of those might be pretty obvious and self-evident to you, like money. You need capital for your down payment, to buy materials, for closing costs, and all that. You need time because even passive deals require some amount of time. And if you're doing an active deal, you're going to need to dedicate a lot of time. And you need skill because even if you want to throw a lot of time and a lot of money at a project, if you don't know what you're doing, you're not going to get very far. And the reason I came up with this framework is because I wanted to demonstrate that as an investor, you don't need all three of these, or at least to be strong in all three of them. Like if you have money, you can trade capital for other people's time or other people's expertise. I got started with very little money and very little skill, and I was able to take all the time I had on my hands and I traded that for other people's skills and for other people's capital. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about the importance of each of these different resources and how you can get started and scale your portfolio depending on which resources you have a lot of and which ones you need to go out and partner for. Hey everyone, it's Dave here for another deep dish episode on the BiggerPockets Real Estate Podcast. And today we're going to be talking about the resource triangle. Again, it's the idea that as an investor, our whole job is to figure out what resources we have, whether that's time, skill, or capital, and how we're going to put those resources towards our next deal or our portfolio as a whole. And for this episode, I thought it would be kind of fun to find investors who started with one of the resources only. So I will represent the time portion because that's how I got started. I'm also going to bring on two guests. The first is Devon Kennard. He had the resource of capital because he was playing in the NFL when he started on his real estate journey, and he was able to use the capital he had to build a portfolio. And we're bringing on Tyler Madden, who was a general contractor before he became an investor. And we'll learn from Tyler how he used his skills remodeling homes and doing a lot of hands-on, boots-on-the-ground type of work helped him build his portfolio over time. We're going to have a really good discussion. A couple questions I'm super excited to get into are, first and foremost, what types of deals work best for investors who have more time versus those who have more money or more skill? How each of us have sort of compensated for our weaknesses in other resource buckets. Like if you have never swung a hammer, you're not really handy. How do you compensate for that in your portfolio? And if you stick around to the end, we'll reveal which skills that we think are secretly overrated in the real estate game. And I think you're going to be surprised about how we all answer them. All right, let's get into this. Devon, welcome back to the BiggerPockets podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be back on, man.
And Tyler, thanks for joining us as well. Have you been on the BiggerPockets podcast before?
Not the grown-up version, just the rookie version a couple times. So I'm excited to be here.
Well, I've obviously known you for a while and our rookies know you, but maybe you can start by just giving us a little intro then.
Yeah, my name's Tyler Madden. I'm based in Denver, Colorado. I am a real estate investor, general contractor. I own a remodeling business that I've been doing that for 10 years, investing in real estate for the last 2 or 3. So just kind of a contractor turned real estate investor.
And perfect person for this exact episode. Thank you.
Yes.
And Devon, man, I shortchanged you last time. You were on the BiggerPockets podcast last week, and I've known Devon for a while. I kind of assumed you had been on the podcast before and introduced you as such, but you hadn't. So could you just give us an intro too for anyone who doesn't know you, Devon?
Yeah, so my name's Devon Kennard. I've been investing in real estate for the last decade now. I started investing right after my rookie season in the NFL and pretty much never stopped. I bought a single family property and just kept stacking and started investing in single family syndications and eventually private lending. And yeah, built a portfolio in each kind of category, and I'm excited to be here. This is only my second episode now, recorded 2 in like a matter of 7 days, and I've been wanting to be on this podcast for a while now. So a great representation of delayed gratification right here.
Yeah, that's awesome. We're going to have to make this a regular thing. And again, sorry for failing to introduce you properly last time you were on the show. Tyler, let's start with you.
Sure.
What drew you to moving from being a contractor and a successful one to starting to actually invest in your own deals?
I think it was very obvious to me when I was doing these things as a contractor for clients. I would do this for homeowners. It was obvious to me that it's what led me to creating my own business. Is being a quality contractor is something that's extremely hard to find and hard to do. Not a lot of people. Let me ask you this. What's our litmus test for cussing? Because I am a contractor.
Well, I think I've sort of broken that barrier a few times on the show since I've been hosting. So no one's going to blame you.
Great. It won't be bad. What I call it is give a shit. And I feel like very few contractors in the world that I saw working with clients and subcontractors, no one had a level of give a shit. So I found a very, very serious passion for caring how to do it. And I couldn't justify owning properties for a long period of time and having someone else work on it and do a half-assed job. So it became obvious to me that my competitive advantage to other investors, or just to, hey, I want a future fueled by passive income, fueled by equity, fueled by all of the benefits that we all know to be true of real estate investing. But I couldn't just go pay for it or do it all myself or, learn the knowledge. So I figured my competitive advantage was being a contractor, and not everyone has that. So identifying what skill set I did have that was applicable, I was like, well, it'd be stupid to ask someone else to do that. Why don't I try and save myself, the agony or the money wasted on other people? So that was kind of my intro, where it was like, well, this is relatable. I didn't dream of being a contractor. It just happened to be something that is very functional and relatable to the things that we're trying to achieve in our life.
Yeah, I mean, being a contractor has to be one of the best 2 or 3 skills for a real estate investor, I imagine, to start. But I can also imagine that, you're running a business, and so, your own business. So how did you figure out how to get those other 2 resources? Because I imagine you had limited time. You're working on other people's projects. And right. I don't know too much about your financial situation, but I imagine you didn't have tons of capital, at least to start investing. So how did you think about acquiring the other resources you needed to do your own deals?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Where in the beginning, it was a function of just asking people who were slightly ahead of us. The first person that we reached out to was actually a friend, a lender of ours, who was helping us buy our personal properties. And I was like, how do people get another primary without getting rid of the last one? How very, very, very many of the people that we know, that's how you get your start. You either house hack and then you house up and you become an accidental landlord where you just keep your first house. So that was our story, but it was, by no other sequence of events than asking people what their move would be, what their move was. So we got motivated to get a HELOC on our property. We got into the equity that I had built as a contractor in our own property, and we utilized that to house up, keep that one as a rental. So that was like door number 1. But then it came to the point of really expanding our portfolio. And that's when we bought 7 units all at once, a 3-unit and a 4-unit. That was like my rookie move. And it was on the heels of being in a mastermind with BiggerPockets' own Ashley Kerr. I was like, oh, we got 2 properties under contract. I don't know what to do next. Like, how do I make this happen? Can I make it happen? And she went to bat right away trying to find solutions. So just learning that you've got to have a level of solution mindedness instead of being like, oh no, there's something that's difficult. How am I going to overcome it? I guess I'll never do it. Other people, and realizing how solution oriented they were, was the motivation for me to be like, oh, okay, cool. We'll reach out to a hard money lender, and then we'll reach out to private money lenders, and then we'll figure out gap financing, and then we'll figure out. So there was just answers for everything all along the way, which is what I learned quickly, instead of being like, oh, I got to become the expert. I got to become the guy with the time. I got to become the guy with the money.
That's right.
Whereas like, find the expert at the thing that you're lacking and go in that direction, if not to use them, to learn from them.
That's great advice. I think that's a lesson a lot of investors learn somewhat painfully, is trying to learn every skill and to be everything in their portfolio.
Exactly.
What is there, 20 different disciplines you need to be good at to be a real estate investor? Thinking that you could do all 20 is arrogant, and you're just going to lose your money or time.
And I'm 100% guilty. I'm 100% guilty of doing that for the first several years, where I was like, no, I can, and you can do it all until such a point. And that's where you have to realize the value of scaling and introducing other people.
Totally.
In terms of, hey, Devon, you got money. Let's talk. Let's figure this out, because I'm capped out, and I can only do this much, and I want to do this much. How do I do it? Not by your damn self.
Exactly. And that's sort of this concept of trading resources that I always come back to, is like, if you have skill, you can trade it for money. people who have money, we'll get to that with Devon in just a second, like are usually looking for someone to help them operate a deal that they don't have the time or the skill to do themselves. And then people with time might be able to offer something to someone who has a lot of knowledge, but can't be boots on the ground. There are ways that you can take what you're good at and exchange it for others. And we'll get to Devon in just a minute. But last question for you here, Tyler, before we move on to the money component is, did all of this, as you scale, you bought 7 units at a time, it's a lot. Did that mean you had to take time away from your contracting business?
Sadly, yes. I chose to focus more on rehabbing and BRRRRing successfully all 7 units, but in the act of doing that, I couldn't be taking client projects for my remodel business. So I did sacrifice my remodel business for the portfolio, and I'm no longer willing to do that, which is why we're scaling both up simultaneously, growing, bringing people onto both teams. But in that moment, it was definitely a choice to say, hey, I got to choose which one's going to thrive, because both of them aren't going to do what I want without other people.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a really tough decision, but it's sort of what you always have to do. Is there's not unlimited resources. You have to figure out, you have a limited amount of time, you have a limited amount of money, you have a limited amount of skills. How are you going to sort of play the game and figure out where to put them in each different bucket to make what makes sense for you? It sounds like for you is taking some of your time bucket and reallocating it from your job into your investing portfolio. It's time for a quick break. On the other side, Devon, Tyler, and I are each going to talk about real deals we got through our respective resources, time, money, and skill, over the course of our investing careers. All right, we're back with Tyler Madden and Devon Kennard. So Devon, let's turn over to you, because I imagine there are some skills from being in the NFL, being a professional football player, that apply to real estate investing, but not in the same way Tyler's probably did. So how did you approach building a portfolio when you probably had limited time and limited knowledge of sort of the nitty gritty of real estate? I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine you hadn't done like a lot of rehab work or property management work at that when you were first getting started.
No, I mean, first to start, like I can say I have now, but when I started investing, I hadn't even like touched a hammer, really, my entire life. I didn't grow up doing that, didn't grow up in a household that did that. So that aspect of things and really being able to trade like the skill or the time, it wasn't an option for me because I didn't have that skill set or that time. But one thing, I think the biggest thing people with some capital to invest have to get their head around is the fact that you're going to sacrifice a little bit of the upside of what you can make when you're coming with the money but don't have time or the skill. I can look at the same property that Tyler looks at and my return's going to look differently than his return. I'm looking at that and it's like I can throw some money at it. I'm going to have to build a team around me to help me renovate this property. So all of that's going to add to the expense. When Tyler can look at that and he's going to be able to, I got the crew in place. We're going to be able to get the material for 60 cents on the dollar. So we're playing a different game. And a lot of people with capital don't realize that. And you're sacrificing some of that upside because you don't have the time or the skill. And that's okay. And wrapping your head around that is a huge hurdle that I think some people who like, I have this money, I want to invest, and I'm seeing these investors getting 20, 30% on a flip. You're not going to necessarily do that when all you have is the capital. So understanding that dynamic is really important.
How did you wrap your head around that, Devon? Because I hear the same thing all the time. Like, I don't want to pay a property manager. I don't want to pay a contractor. And of course, you want to maximize your return, but as we've been talking about, you can't do it all yourself. And so how did you get into the right mindset for being an investor that has some money and is going to have to trade that money for some of the other elements of being an investor?
For me, it came down to, all right, if I don't do it, it's either like learn how to do it passively and accept maybe a little haircut on the upside, or don't do it at all. And not doing it at all when you're in a career that is going to end, it makes no sense. So what I always tell to others, like I felt like I was a little more forced to that conclusion because of my career. But I think everyone should have that mindset, because at some point you're gonna your career is gonna end either by choice or by force. So having the mindset of like, okay, I got to prepare for what life looks like outside of that. I think that's kind of the key that you have to really look at, and the perspective that I kept. And I was buying turnkey properties, which I don't think works as well today, but I was getting a solid 8 to 10% cash on cash return, and that was solid in good working class markets in the Midwest. And that's what I was, churning along with. But if I were to buy those properties as an more active investor trading skill, then maybe those returns could have been 15 to 20% cash on cash. But I was okay with that bump because I purchased those properties and really didn't have to do anything with them once I purchased them, besides look at statements every month and, kind of oversee things, make sure they were going okay.
I'd imagine that starting with money, it's easy in one way, because like you have a lot of flexibility. But I would imagine that picking a team and finding the right partners is pretty tough, because you probably have a lot of people who want to work with you. How did you find the right people to contribute that time and skill portion of your portfolio?
I think the most important thing you can do if you have money to invest is gain the knowledge. So I don't have to know how to put hammer to nail like Tyler does, but I need to have a general idea of how a construction job is supposed to go and what the process is, and understand we should probably have a contract in place with the budget as well as the timeline and guardrails to protect me. So I see a lot of people with capital to invest, and they're getting pitched opportunities, and contractors are coming up and, I could do that job in 4 weeks and I could do it for, $30,000, knowing dang well they're going to get into the project and it's probably going to take double the time and double the money. So, it's easy to kind of like have the shiny object syndrome when you're dealing with some capital, but don't have the skill at the time. So I always really kind of press upon people to gain the general knowledge to understand what you're looking for, and surround yourself around people who have alignment in your vision and who, are good character people, I would say is really important, because when you're the money, you can get taken advantage of if you don't protect yourself.
I'll tell you my story in just a second, with no money. But as you become more successful and you have capital to invest, to be in a fortunate situation, I totally understand that, Devon. Like, even when I want to, I started with rental property investing. Now I start to do private lending. I'm trying to do deals right now. I'm just like trying to, read the documents, learn the process, and try not to be, the greedy is not the right word, but try not to like get the whole world in one deal, and realize that like either, my wife always says this with her job, it's like you either need to be earning or learning. And I totally think about that with real estate. It's like, you don't necessarily have to earn a great return on every deal. If you learn something on a deal, that's just as valuable, not financially, but in the long term of your portfolio, it's pretty darn valuable. All right, so I do want to ask you guys for some examples of times that you've used your primary resource to get deals in just a second. So I'm curious to hear about that, but I'll just round out our conversation, because we've heard about how Tyler has used his skill as a contractor to get into investing, how Devon used the capital he was earning from his full-time job to get into investing. When I first got it started, I was waiting tables, and it's a tough job, but it got all day to do pretty much nothing most days. I thought a lot of days I didn't start work till 5. I would have 3 or 4 days off in a row. And I had time to property manage. I had time to go drive around and look for deals. I had time to go to just, I don't even know how many open houses, just looking at houses to just try and understand the differences between properties. And I used that in my original time to attract capital partners, because I knew people who wanted to invest in real estate. They worked a 60 or 70 hour a week. They didn't have time to think about what deals to buy in what neighborhood in Denver. They wanted to find someone who was going to go just honestly hustle his ass off, even though I didn't know anything, just was committed to learning. And I was able to basically trade that for time and for skill. So I traded that for money and capital, but I also traded it for skill. I actually, for one of the brokers I worked with for my first deal, I made cold calls for them for a couple of months. So they would sort of teach me the business and teach me things about the Denver market, because I had just moved to Denver 6 months earlier. And so I just found ways to leverage what I had, which was probably too much time on my hands, and to translate that into a real estate portfolio. And so hopefully you can see that these are three super different ways to start getting into real estate: contractor, waiting tables with a lot of time, or someone working full time and who has capital to invest. And there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just about figuring out how to allocate resources. So Devon, let's go to you. Just can you tell us about one of your first deals and like how you pulled one off, playing in the NFL, having some money to invest? Like, how'd you pull off just a good example of finding good partners with your capital?
So I'll talk about my first deal. So my first property ever was in Beech Grove, Indiana for $86,000. And it was off season right after my rookie season. I went to a real estate meetup in Phoenix, Arizona. And I met a couple of investors who were doing some work here, but I didn't really want to invest in Arizona at the time because it was expensive. And I was like, I want to find a cheaper market. So this one investor connected me with his cousin who invested in Indiana. So I took a couple of days, went out to visit, saw his whole operations. He was fix and flipping at scale, somewhere between 10 to 20 properties a month. And his wife handled all property management, had her separate company. So I got to see their whole operation. I went to like 6 different properties, and I'm like, okay, this might be a good way for me to get, some exposure. So I bought a property from him, and there was already a tenant in the property actually. So as soon as I purchased it, his wife started managing it. I started to learn about Appfolio and looking at, P&Ls and, that whole thing and going through the line items. So I'll say she was very hands-on with me, which I appreciated. And that kind of taught me the process. And I started to create parameters like, okay, if anything pops up more than $200, I want to know about it. If it's less than that, just handle it without coming to me. And I was able to kind of build on that, see how it went. But unfortunately, he kind of disappeared on me.
Oh.
He had another connection with institutional buyer that started buying up all of his deals. So he stopped answering my phone calls. I couldn't get him on the line because I wanted to buy more properties. So that taught me a valuable lesson to, like, if I'm going to enter a new market, make sure I have the relationships to sustain it and to scale there. So that led to me starting to do the same thing, but I learned what a turnkey provider was. So I started to research other markets, and Cleveland's the next market that I went to. And it was the same type of thing. I met someone who was flipping homes at scale and was like, hey, I want to kind of buy a few properties from you. And if it goes well, I'll keep buying. And, I started doing that in Kansas City, Missouri as well.
Oh, that's great. It's just a perfect example of how you took what you got, which was capital to invest, and then basically bought other people's expertise. And it sounds like, one bad partner out of a handful, which honestly, if you're in real estate, it's just going to happen. It's just part of the game. But it sounds like you learned your lesson and were able to find the right people to contribute the time and skill to your portfolio. What about you, Tyler? Can you tell us about one of your first deals where you brought your contracting skills to the game?
Yeah, I mentioned those 7 units that we bought. It was me learning as much as I could, because similar story to you, when I was contracting, it wasn't all day every day. It was me whenever I had clients. I had time between projects where I would dive deep, learn as much as I could about what real estate investing was. I read, the book on BRRRR investing, and I was like, if I'm going to invest in real estate, I have to have value add. I have to have something that I can actually force some equity, because unlike Devon, I didn't have the money to go buy the turnkey stuff. I was like, market value? No way. Can't handle it. Can't fathom it. Doesn't pencil for me. So it was all based on what can I do to maximize my skills. So I was looking for, something that was value add. We were looking on market. We weren't really well connected, so we didn't have relationships with wholesalers. So we found some on market stuff, but Denver prices are absurd. absurd. So what we had to do is go through the process of figuring out, hey, what pencils? Single family home, BRRRRs didn't pencil because you're never going to make the rent to cover the mortgage. So we're like, cool, multifamily. So we start looking in multifamily stuff. We get one under contract, while another one we submitted an offer on, a 3-unit under contract. We submitted an offer on a 4-unit the week prior, and they told us that we weren't winning that one. They were like, oh, someone else outbid you. And we're like, all right, cool, whatever. So we get this 3-unit under contract. 2 weeks later, we get a call from that agent on the 4-unit, and they're like, hey, they backed out. You're the next best offer. Do you want it? And I laughed at him. I was like, yeah, but I don't have the money. So literally exactly what we're talking about. And this is what forced me to expand this solution-oriented thinking, where it's like, well, instead of just being like, nope, out of my expertise, I've done everything that I can with the money that I have. So that's when we were like, well, how do we do this? So we asked some professionals that were already doing this, expanding their portfolios. So we actually buy all 7 units, the 3-unit and a 4-unit. We inherited terrible tenants. We had to remodel one every time a tenant moved out. So I spent literally the next 12 months of my time, and this is when my wife was 9 months pregnant. So through all of this, I'm nights and weekends over at these 2 properties trying to literally gut every single bit of them. But, Devon made the point earlier, I'm getting material at my cost. I'm using my subcontractors. There's no markup. So again, this is something where if it's pulled off, and this was a tremendous amount of work for me to rehab 7 units over the course of a year, one by one, as people move out, while also managing terrible tenants. Mm-hmm. That was something that was just a massive expense, just emotionally, mentally, trying to balance all of that. However, we BRRRRed both properties. I BRRRRed the 3-unit property. We left $20,000 into it. We BRRRRed the other one. We took $60,000 out. So we were effectively up $40,000 across the 7 doors. And right now, I think across the 2, we've got maybe $600,000 in equity. Where it was like, hey, that was a really good sacrifice for me to do all of that insane stuff and get out of my comfort zone and be like, how could I possibly buy 7 units? Well, you figure it out and you sacrifice a little bit.
I'm just curious, Tyler. I would imagine, being you now, that you are a very desirable person to partner with, because like your skill set of having been a contractor and now being an investor, I feel like that's kind of like a superpower to have those 2 sets of experience.
That's always been my angle, where getting into real estate investing, I realize very few people have construction knowledge, and very few people that have construction knowledge have real estate investing knowledge. So I educated myself on both sides of the spectrum, where I fortunately get to be 2 of multiple necessities, where if I can blend those, it becomes something where, it's a equation where it's weighted very favorably on my side. Not to say that I win every time, but it just minimizes the gamble, for me on my projects. And that's the only way that I'm willing to go into these sort of things, is making sure that, you stack the cards in your favor. It's not guaranteeing a win, but, it's what I like to think is our competitive advantage.
I'd love to hop in there because from my angle, it's kind of the same thing. It was really cool hearing Tyler's perspective on that, because I want to stack the skill sets and be able to learn things. And I'm never going to put hammer to nail like Tyler does. But one thing, I now will do value add projects. And I did a 6-plex, a duplex, and I have another 6-plex that I'm finishing renovations on now. But what I've been able to do is really hone in on what's the price per square foot for a rehab, for the type of rehabs I do. So I'll kind of price it out and be like, all right, I don't know exactly what everything costs, but you're coming up way too high in comparison. Like I've done a couple full guts. I've done some cosmetics. I have a general idea of what something could cost. So utilizing the skill and my portfolio knowledge of doing it for a while to gain the skill set of really holding contractors and partners accountable and increasing my revenue potential to where, earlier I said, when you're just a capital, you don't always get as much upside. Well, after doing this for a while, I want some of the upside too. So that's where I started private lending. And then I do value add, but I'm not the hammer to the nail. So it's like, how can I hold them accountable? How can I make sure the contract job and the construction is within budget? So there's things you can do even from my side to start to make more money and be more profitable, but it takes knowledge and time. Like I want to put the cards in my hand just like Tyler does. Yeah. And it's how can I do that from my standpoint with being the capital? Well, you're not going to be able to just tell me a job's going to take $300,000 and that's $300 a square foot when average rehabs I've done is $70 a square foot. Like, I know you're blowing smoke, you're overcharging. So I would say that's become an advantage, being able to kind of know that, but it takes time.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point because we sort of framed this discussion, at least at the beginning, at how you got started. And each of us started somewhere different. But I do think eventually you have to sort of get to this point where ideally you have a little bit of each. Like ideally you have to commit some time to every deal, even if you're entirely passive doing a syndication. You at least have to network and find operators. You need to underwrite deals, like that kind of stuff. Usually if you want to, grow a big portfolio, you have to have some capital. It's pretty hard to get past those first few deals just on time and skill alone. And the same thing goes with time. Like I hustled my way into my first deal. I basically just property managed for sweat equity in my first deal. And I was a terrible property manager, but I was willing to put 20 hours into what would take a good property manager an hour. I was super inefficient, but I did it. I think it was in 2015. So like 5 years into my investing career, I sort of had this realization that I was pretty useless in a portfolio perspective. Like I didn't have a ton of money at the time. I had learned a little bit of skill, but like I didn't have something that made me super valuable to anyone else. And that was holding back my investing career. And I wound up, thinking like, oh, I've worked in tech, like I'm pretty good at analytics and data and stuff. So I wound up going back to school and getting a master's degree in analytics, knowing that I wanted to stay in real estate. Like I know a lot of people probably wouldn't do that, but I was like, this is my skill set. This is what I'm good at. And so I'm going to do this and I'm going to apply this to real estate. I got that degree, wound up getting a job at BiggerPockets with it, which was awesome. But it just shows like, over time, you can augment your skills. You can reallocate your resources. Because I knew just throwing time at problems, not going to help. I needed to learn skills. Skills brought me into having money. And now I have the ability to sort of balance all three buckets, right? And reposition them as I need to. So let's turn the conversation to that. Like Devon, you've spoken a little bit about this, but like now that you're retired from the NFL, how do you think about balancing the three buckets to build your portfolio from here going forward?
I still consider myself more on the capital bucket than time and skill, because I don't want to learn how to contract jobs and do renovations. And I also
sucks.
But yeah, I also don't want to commit an exceeded amount of time. So it's like, I'm willing to the biggest difference now is I'm willing to give more time. So I still don't want to feel like I'm working 40, 60 hours and I have to work or things aren't going to happen. I'm not going to be able to make any money. But, if I was working 5 to 10 hours a week while I was playing, I'm willing to work 20, or maybe sometimes even a little more than that. So understanding that, and how can I leverage the fact that I'm putting a little more time into this to take advantage of the capital that I have to invest, as well as, all right, the skill set I'm developing and understanding how to manage a job and understanding the nuances of owning and managing real estate, buying real estate. So I think that's been kind of my strong suit. I've leveraged a little more time to build relationships with wholesalers, to start a lending company so I can lend to, established investors. And that's increased my revenue potential a ton, while also being able to capitalize on the fact that I do have money to invest. So that's been kind of my balance and trade-off. And, I want to continue to grow with that.
And I would imagine it varies from deal to deal, right? Even, that's sort of like portfolio perspective, but I think you and I take similar approach. Like we do both passive and some active investing. It's like I am able to do a little bit of active investing because I focus a lot on passive investing too. And each deal you kind of have to assess how you want to approach it. Like how much time are you going to put into this deal? How much money are you going to put into this deal? How much of your skill set can you put into this deal? And then, that sort of adds up. How do you allocate resources at a whole portfolio level? All right, it's time for one last break, but we'll be back in a few. What if you could buy new construction homes up to $20,000 below market value? That's right, 20 grand in instant equity. But what if you could use that same 20 grand to cover your down payment or to score a lower mortgage rate? Talk about being spoiled for choices. Right now, Rent to Retirement is offering investors their choice of incentives when they invest in a new turnkey property. Your options? Up to 20 grand below retail pricing on new construction homes, which basically means you get instant equity. Or you can get 5% down payment credits. That means less cash out of your pocket. If you're tired of high rates, use that $20,000 to lower your interest rate to as low as 3.99% and score free property management for a year. Rent to Retirement's final option? How about a no money down investor loan? Take your choice of instant equity, low or no money down, or a rate as low as 3.99%. To learn more, visit renttoretirement.com. That's renttoretirement.com. Or just text REI to 33777. REI to 33777 to take advantage of these limited time incentives. We're back on the BiggerPockets Real Estate Podcast. What about you, Tyler? How do you approach it now that you've matured in your investing career? How do you think about your buckets?
I'm really glad we went here because I think we really nailed it. Like, this is where we all started. We realized that we were siloed into one thing that we brought to the table. But to Devon's point, you've got to know a little bit about everything. You should be dangerous in every level. And for me, we're talking about time and we keep talking about time. Many real estate investors, I think the reason we're doing this is because we want control over our time. Where when you get started, the story that we all just told is like, I was doing stuff that I shouldn't have been doing, but it got me in the game. And now at a certain point, I'm unwilling to do that stuff anymore, but I'm also unwilling to give up my competitive advantage. So what I'm trying to figure out is taking my skill set, which, my best skill set is not being a general contractor with a hammer in hand doing actual physical projects. It's growing and scaling a business, being a visionary and a CEO. So I'm allocating my time to figure out how do I replace myself as the contractor without giving up or forfeiting the benefit that it brought me. Where we're scaling our construction business such that I'm no longer the guy that has to be on the job doing the things. So that just becomes like something that exists in the background and it's on autopilot without me having to contribute my time to it. So then I get to go think about, hey, where is the best place for me to spend my time? Probably raising money, making relationships, finding partnerships, getting into new opportunities, advancing, the objective. So all of these things can make me money because at the end of the day, that's what I want is all this stuff needs to collectively create passive income. So that's where my focus is like big picture, getting myself out of the weeds at the ground level and think about like, what's the 30,000 foot view? What's the purpose? Why are we doing this? And are all things pointing in that direction? Because I don't want a job. I don't think any of us want a job. So figuring out how to get myself out of all of these like low level, weed level problems and just think of solutions for the big picture.
Just if anyone at BiggerPockets is listening, I do want a job. I would like to keep my job, just for the record.
I take it back. Most of us don't want a job.
No, I have a great job, so I'm lucky in that regard. But all right, last question for both of you. If you guys had one resource that you could have more of right now to grow your business, what would it be? And number two, if there's a resource that you think is overrated. Devon, I'll start with you.
Okay.
And take a minute to think about it. We can edit out the awkward silence if you have any minute.
The one skill I wish I had, I would say, could really price out a job granularly. I feel like I've gotten better at like I mentioned, the price per square foot. I try to like get a good idea and have a gauge of what I'm going to pay. But I feel like I get nickeled and dimes when I am doing a rehab job because I admittedly don't know what things cost. And I have to I'll get a couple of quotes, but I have to, at the end of the day, kind of trust that I'm getting a decent price. And I just wish I knew that a little bit more and or had those direct connections to get better pricing. And the one thing I think is overrated is trading a lot of time to invest in real estate. I think especially today with software that you can use and AI and relationship, I feel like you don't have to you don't have to work 80 hours a week to be very successful in real estate. And you might have to sacrifice some of the upside to be less active, but I think you can make some really good money without working crazy hours in real estate. And, that's no shade to anyone who is putting all that time in, because I'm sure they're killing it. But I don't think it's worth it. I think you can make good enough money with working 40 hours or less to where, the people who are slaving in it, I don't think that's worth it. So that's my take.
Dude, you stole mine, but those are good answers. Tyler, what are yours?
The thing that I would like more of is like the resource would be human capital, is other people and other people to help contribute to the things. Because again, I've operated until a certain point to like, I got to earn my stripes. I got to be the guy that does the things. And at every level, it's always like, how do I be the guy first? And then I'll find the people. Whereas like I'm totally shifting my perspective on that and have been for the last year and a half. Whereas like trying to scale a business that is dependent upon other people contributing to the vision. That's what I wish in my current state I had more of, is reliable, trustworthy human capital, people that can join the vision and contribute to it, because that's where scale happens, in my opinion.
Such a hard one though.
But I think my skill set's probably the most overrated, whereas like you don't need to be good at this. Like you can find someone you trust, go build a relationship with someone that has a skill, where you could have no time and no money and just go find a me. Like there's trustworthy people out there. The best skill anyone can bring to real estate investing is relationships and building them and like finding trustworthy people. We've all been burned by someone. Most of them are contractors, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
But I think we're all also here to prove that there are good everything out there. There's good contractors out there. There's good, guys with time out there. There's good lenders out there where everyone's expecting that they're going to get taken advantage of somehow. But I think, you're best served by just spending time getting to know people in a way where it's like, hey, let me feel you out as a person, instead of, again, a tool or a spreadsheet or a ratio or a formula of like, I'll only do business with you because you fit the bill of what I need for a return, where it's like, no, do I like you as a human? Can we come together on like what we believe in and let's do some meaningful business together? I think if you've got that skill set, you don't need any of the three things that we have.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Very true.
Well, I'm going to agree with Devon. I just feel so weak with construction. You guys know James Standard, right? He's on the show a lot. That dude's brain is just like an encyclopedia of scope of work and prices. Like he could just look at a house and be like, that window will be $2,000 and you should replace it. You should move that wall there, like blah, blah, blah. Like in like 10 seconds. If I had that skill, my God, it would be unbelievable. They would just like open up so many more deals. And I think it's just like something I'm like self-conscious about. Like I've done some BRRRRs and stuff, but I've never done like a gut rehab. And I just feel like I need to do that. I need to rip the Band-Aid off and take some bruises doing it, just so I like understand it a little bit better. And I've slowly taken on more and more, but sometime I'm just going to have to knock something down and build it back up, just so I can learn. And for the thing I think is overrated, I'm going to piss a lot of people off right now. I think off-market deal finding is the most overrated skill in the entire business. People talk about this all the time, that you have to be like calling sellers, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's much more about what Tyler said. I've bought off-market deals just by talking to other investors, by talking to agents. And even that's how you find good on-market deals. I just think I will never in my life, and I mean, maybe I will one day, but I think there's almost no chance in my life where I'm going to start sending out yellow letters or driving for dollars or doing anything like that.
Amen.
I just don't think you need it. It just seems like a waste of time.
Especially as a newbie where you're untested and you're starting from the ground up.
I'm glad I could get that off my chest.
I'd rather pay the wholesaler a little fee and get the deal brought to me.
Yes.
Nailed it.
There are people who do that for their jobs. Let them do it. Exactly. All right. Well, I'm glad that we got this. This was cathartic for me. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you both so much for being here. I really appreciate it. If you want to connect with Devon or Tyler, we'll put their BiggerPockets profiles, the social media links in the show notes below. Tyler, thanks for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And Devon, thanks for being here again in just the second week. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome, guys.
And thank you all so much for listening. We'll see you in a couple days for another episode of the BiggerPockets podcast.